academics usually have only one talk. Wherever they go, they take their talk and then they take some slides out and put some slides in, and that's a new talk. This is different. Okay, I've never ever given that talk. So bear with me. I probably have to look at my notes from time to time because I also don't have to present to you. So Jota gave me a funny task. He basically said, do you remember that you wrote that chapter a century ago on Synchrony? Why don't you give a talk about that chapter? And I promise you, I had to read the chapter to understand what we had written there. And you should try that. Like, try to read something that you have written quite some time ago. This time it was a positive experience because I thought that was not that stupid. And so what I'll try is to get some messages out of that chapter that may hopefully apply to emotional synchrony, and give you an overview over where I have crossed the path of synchrony, so to speak, in my work, which is basically 3 areas. So I've worked on what has social aspects, but what you probably can call best intrapersonal synchrony. Then I have, especially through the chapter, looked at a little bit of interpersonal synchrony, and then I can talk about relational synchrony, which is probably then closest to this idea of emotional synchrony. Okay, so let's start with how we usually talk about synchrony and how we take it apart, because it's quite a complex phenomenon. And the idea in that chapter that you see there listed on the bottom, that I co-authored with Paula Palladino and Daniel Wagner's, is that you can look at 3 different aspects when you talk about synchrony. The first is that there is usually a rhythm that is present. And that rhythm can be present either simply by the movement or behavior of other people, but very often there is an external cue, an external source to the rhythm. And in most cases that will be music, but in simpler cases it's other types of cues of repeated auditory stimulation or tactile stimulation, etc. So there is a rhythm which gives a structure to the behavior, and that rhythm can come from the behavior of other people, or it can come from external cues. And I think that's really important to acknowledge that when we talk about synchronous behavior, it's not just an interpersonal phenomenon between people, but that there are other cues in the environment that contribute in this manner. The second aspect of synchronous behavior is that there is simultaneous movement through entrainment. And entrainment is to my knowledge, is a term that was popularized by Günth Semit, with whom I did a postdoc many years ago. So his idea was that once you have rhythm, either through music or through other people's movement, and you allow basically behavior to couple by perception and by having some freedom in the movement, that you get entrainment, so that the behavior of the people mutually assimilates. And he has studied that, for instance, by looking at people walking side by side on treadmills, and you see that people approach the same phase in their movement, synchronize for a while, then fall out of synchrony again, then go back into. So this process of approaching simultaneous movement, that's what is called entrainment. And you can find entrainment in basically all the systems that move and have some degrees of freedom in their movement. So the very same processes that can be described as similar formulas, you can also find when you hang 2 clocks, like these old grandfather clocks that have the movements at the back. So when you put them side by side on a wall and there is some transmission of resonance between the clocks, you will find entrainment between these clocks. And it's basically the same phenomenon. So the term entrainment you can define very loosely. And finally, what you get is a smooth meshing of interactions where it's not anymore the case that the same movement is copied in the same rhythm, but then that you then have basically compatible movements. An example of that is dance. So when people dance with each other, the movement of the feet is often mirrored, but basically is simultaneous, otherwise you would step on each other's feet. But once in a while you break out, and then you have compatible movements, so where you don't perform the same movement, but you perform compatible movements. So that if the guiding person tries to basically rotate the other person, then suddenly you have very different movements, but they're still coordinated. That is what they mean with smooth meshing of interactions. So when you take this together, I think you can appreciate a more complex picture of synchrony, going away from the very simple cases, for instance, soldiers marching in synchrony in drill. That's a very simple case, to more complex cases of, for instance, dance, where you have different aspects. So then you have external rhythm and not just the rhythm of the other people. You do have simultaneous movement, and then you get complex, compatible behavior rather than simple copy. So I think that's kind of the framework for looking at this. So now let's come to empirical evidence, but which I will not. I don't have any numbers on my slides, but I'll talk you through some of the studies that we have done on what I would call interpersonal synchrony. And what is important to understand there is that, maybe contrary to your intuition, our body image is not constant. Instead, it is updated the whole time. So we are basically all the time trying to figure out, what is my body? Where does it end? What does it look like? And what do I have to include in my body? And we do that, or our brain does that, based on the synchrony of the modalities that we perceive. So we take into account all the modalities, basically check what is synchronous in what I perceive in the various modalities, what I predict to happen based on my action plans, and then I decide, okay, this is my body. And this phenomenon has been most nicely shown in these illusions. The rubber hand illusion, which was discovered first, and then later versions of it called effacement illusion and body swap illusion. So this is work. The rubber hand illusion was first published by Boltvinnik and Cohn, I think late 80s. There was lots of interesting work by Magnus Kiris, more recent work by a Swedish cognitive psychologist called Persson. And we have done some work on the effacement illusion. So I did this together with Paula Paladino. So who knows what the rubber hand illusion is? Who has seen this? No, you're not. A little bit. Okay. So we should try to perform this. Can I steal you?
Yes.
Can you come here?
Okay.
So maybe just put your right hand here. So you have to imagine, so Hotta is the participant in the study. He puts his one hand on the table, and he sees his hand, and his left hand is hidden. And then instead of his left hand, he sees another hand. And that can be actually a real person's hand, or it can be a rubber hand, and that's why, so an artificial hand, that's why this is called this name. And actually the way we did it in our studies is that we have a flat screen placed on the table, and then people see a screen with a hand there. So imagine he sees another hand here, and then the experimenter, so I don't have enough hands for this. The experimenter sits in, yeah, exactly. So put this, but imagine it's not his hand. Okay?
It's not my hand.
And his real hand is over here, but he doesn't see it, so there's a wall in between. So then the experimenter has two brushes. I'll just use 2 pens. And sits in front, and then strokes the real hand, which is over here, and the artificial hand. Strokes with a brush, yeah? And the brushing is done along the fingers, and it's extremely important in the same rhythm, so at the same time, the same finger, yeah? And you brush, and you brush, and you do this like 60 times, 2-3 minutes, and he sits there and is like, what are they doing? And then suddenly it's a switch, and the illusion kicks in. And then what he thinks, what he feels, not what he feels, it's an important distinction. What he feels is that this is his hand. And the real hand is over here, he doesn't see it, and it ceases to be part of the body. Yeah? So basically the hand switches position. And then this feels to be his hand. And cognitively, of course, you still know this is not the real hand. But the illusion is striking. Yeah? So you should try this. Then there are various ways to test this. Of course, you can ask later in self-report, how strongly did you feel that this was your hand? You can actually do a test where you then hide the real hand from view, actually, I think usually people have to close their eyes, and then they have to point with the real hand. They have to point where the real hand is. So you're sitting like here. Here was the rubber hand. They try to point, and the stronger the illusion, the more they move basically their estimation. They're pointing in this direction. And then the final version is that to basically threaten the hand, so they take a knife and say like this, and then the stronger the electrodermal reaction, the stronger they had the feeling that this was their hand. Okay. So that's the rubber hand illusion, and then we did some studies on that. The one that was eventually published was with the face, and it's a similar procedure, but instead of looking at a rubber hand, you look at a face on a screen, and the face is brushed, and your own face is brushed in the same spot, in the same rhythm. And that illusion is not as strong, but after a while you also develop this feeling that somehow this is your face, even though it's a stranger's face. Yeah? So it's not incorporating directly into your own body image, but you basically get the sense that this is your mirror, as if you would cause that. And the final version is the body swap illusion that Emotion has done a lot, and there you put on the virtual reality headset, and you look down. So the version that I experienced is that you simply look down and you don't see your own body, you see either a filmed body from somebody else or a virtual body, and that body is also stroken with a brush, and your real body is stroken with a brush. And for me, that was instantly. Yeah. So it was maybe 2-3 brushes, and I immediately had the impression that that was my body, and my real body was not there. So this phenomenon shows the plasticity of the body image, that we basically are very easily fooled to change our body image. And the idea why we are able to do this is that we use this basically when we interact with tools. So when we use a hammer or when we use other tools and get very proficient on it using that, they basically become part of our body image. And because we interact with tools, we are very good at this. What is interesting is that these illusions are not easily broken by aspects of that virtual body. So we have done studies where, as I said, you experience the rubber illusion with a hand that is displayed on the screen. manipulated whether that hand was white or black for white participants, and we never had any moderation. So the illusion is so strong and bottom up that people incorporate black hands into their body just fine, even if they're white. Same with gender. The thing that breaks it is if it's the wrong size. So it can be a little too large, but it cannot be too small for some reason. I think nobody knows why. What also breaks it is if you move your real hand, and the illusion is immediately gone. So even though it cannot be broken by these social aspects, it has downstream consequences. And that is what we focused on. So when you incorporate another person's face through this effacement illusion into your body image, you basically instantaneously develop some kind of relation to that person. You can measure that through these circle measures of felt closeness, very similar to the identity fusion measures. You can ask people how close they feel. You can ask how similar they are. You can ask even for attractiveness, and you basically always find the same pattern. That people with whom you have experienced this kind of synchrony, you feel close to them. And if you do exactly the same procedure, but the synchrony is off, then you don't develop that illusion, and you don't develop this pseudo-social kind of relation. Yeah. So, as I said, I think about this as a primarily intrapersonal outcome of synchrony because it changes your body image. Yeah? It makes your body image different, and then it has downstream social consequences. But because it changes your body image first, I prefer to see this as an intrapersonal process. Just as a side note, there are some people who do not experience this illusion. Usually in the experiments that you do on them, people screen out those people. So there's about 10% of the population that doesn't feel it, that doesn't experience it. And it seems to be that those people who don't have it, they have usually also some other type of disorder regarding their body image. So for instance, anorexic people often don't experience the relevant illusion. Okay, so now let's come to the second case, the interpersonal synchrony. And there you can similarly start from observations that may be a little bit unintuitive. The first one is that people are rarely not moving. In fact, we're almost always moving a little bit, even if we try to sit or stand very still. Actually, we have now in Oslo, in the Department of Psychology, there's an interdisciplinary center, a combination of psychologists and musicologists. It's called Rhythm. And they created a world championship in standing still. And it's really hard. So they measure, I think they measure it using some kind of motion tracking technology. There are some people who are really good at this, but most people really cannot stand still. And that is I think that's the intro observation also to understand interpersonal synchrony. So people are rarely at rest. And because they are always moving, there is opportunity to synchronize them. And then, when we are not at rest but we move, much of what we do is rhythmic. So we breathe in a rhythm. We walk and run in a rhythm. We talk to each other using actually various kinds of rhythms at different time scales. If you had a baby, you know that when you rock them, they love it if it's rhythmical. If you are a scientist and you type in a very rhythmic way. Physical labor is often done in a rhythm. So if you shovel or if you ground corn, etc., this is all done in rhythms. We chew in a rhythm, we make love in a rhythm. So a lot of what we do is rhythmic. And if you put people together, they have to move, and there is some kind of external cue, then what happens is that they synchronize up just spontaneously. And the weird thing is that this is the default. Yeah, so if you just put people together and they have to move in a way where there is similarity, there is phasing, there is the possibility to sync up, they will most likely sync up. They will go in synchrony, maybe fall out again, go back, but syncing is the default. And what the studies on the cognitive consequences have shown is that not to be in synchrony is hard and requires cognitive resources. While if you are in synchrony, it basically frees up cognitive resources for other tasks. That's the outcome of that. That's especially true if the effectors, so if the body parts that are moving are the same. And it's especially true if the range of possible behavior is restricted. So if people have to do something with their arms and the movement is somewhat similar, then they will basically automatically sync up. What is behind that is that people process biological movements of other people automatically. So we cannot not understand the rhythm of another person. We're so good at this that you probably know these stick figure videos where you only see, or not even stick figures, but light point videos where you only see light points attached to a head, to the hips, to the legs, and the hands move. You could say, well, this is just white points moving back and forth on a black screen. But what you see is a person, because we're so biologically prepared to understand the movement of other people. Okay, the final point of that is that one contributing factor to the synchronizing, and especially to then assimilating your behavior to the synchronous movement of another, is to attribute a mind. So the more you think that the behavior that you're seeing is performed by somebody with a mind, the more you sync up and the more you assimilate your movements to this synchronous behavior. So people sync up a little less if it's a mindless robot, compared to when they think it's a human being, even though the movement that they see is exactly the same. So there are nice studies showing that. Okay. There are two competing theoretical traditions trying to model this and trying to create predictions about it. One is behavioral dynamics, the other one is the common coding tradition, common coding perspective. Behavioral dynamics is inspired by movement science. They have interesting formulas about phasic transitions, etc. They can basically predict and compute the actual synchronous behavior. They don't go into much depth regarding the cognitive underpinnings of this, and they don't have much to say about social motivations, physical, emotional outcomes, etc. So they basically just look at the objective behavior. So they're coming out of a tradition that is not very cognitive. Common coding perspectives come from the school of Wolfgang Prinz, and then the later authors in this field are Sebans, Knoblich. And their idea is that we code events and the outcomes of our own action at the same level, so that we basically, if I clap, that I code this behavior not on the level of the movements of my arm, but at the final position of my hand. So to allow a smooth integration of what I want to achieve in the world and the movement of my own body. I would say they've both been successful in their part of description. Behavioral dynamics, as I said, is great at predicting how people sync up and predicting actually body movements. Common coding is great at predicting who syncs up with whom, but they are not good at timing issues. So they're not good at predicting, for instance, synchrony to external rhythms, etc. And at least 4 years ago when we wrote that chapter, there was not much talk between these traditions. And we concluded that you basically need both in order to understand this. But I think to draw inspiration for the emotional synchrony, I think these formulas and descriptions that they have developed in their behavioral dynamics approach are most interesting because they talk about timing. And that kind of language is usually unusual for us, but probably the more inspiring. Okay, let me come to the final point where I have thought about synchrony. That is in terms of relational outcomes. So when we experience synchrony, or when we perceive synchrony between other people, that usually informs our inferences about the behavior, about the relation between these people. So when we perceive synchrony between others, what we do is that we assume they have a communal sharing relation with each other. So a communal relation, one of closeness, one of intimacy. That also happens when it is when you yourself find yourself in synchrony with other people. And you probably know this phenomenon when you walk with somebody else that you actually don't like that much. And you suddenly find yourself to be in the same walking rhythm, it feels wrong, and you try to break out of it. Then for a while, using cognitive resources, you can control it, and if it's difficult, then you will fall back into it. So it has an affective and cognitive inferential component to observe or to find yourself in behavioral synchrony with another person, and it implies communal sharing. And there is the link to the very first body of work that I told you about regarding this body image, because what we think happens is that you are inferring basically that your bodies are connected, and because the self or the relation itself of communal sharing is grounded in the body, what you are basically perceiving to some extent is that you share a body the moment you behave in synchrony. Because we infer where our body ends from synchronous simulation. And the strongest case of that is probably soldiers walking in synchrony in drill. And what they describe, the experience that they describe, is that they feel basically to become part of a larger body in which they are just one part. So that's the extreme case of this rubber hand illusion, where you have the illusion that you are not just somebody else becomes part of your body image, but that your body becomes something, it's part of a larger entity. Developed by Alan Fisk. We call this consubstantial assimilation, which is, I was told, a Catholic term, actually. So the idea of relational models theory in that regard is that every one of the 4 models has its own medium of communication, and the one of communal sharing is to connect bodies. That can happen by synchrony. It can also happen through commensalism, so sharing the same food. It can happen through getting into the same clothing, getting the same tattoos, using the same drugs, touch, sex. So anything that connects bodies basically that leads to to the inference of sharing a body and then to having a communal relation with each other. And that's how people communicate to each other and to outsiders, that they have this relation, yeah, through all of these means that make the body the same, make the body connected. And in that sense, we think it can be a cause of Kamamuta, so to experience strong synchrony probably moves people. But to be honest, even after thinking about it for a while, I don't know any particular anecdote or experience. So I don't have any video. As for most other things, I do have one. Not for synchrony. And maybe the reason is that it's not sudden enough. So most of the strong Kamamuta experiences, they arise when you have a sudden hug or a sudden realization of communal sharing, a sudden offer of food, or somebody kneels down to propose marriage. Yeah? So it's that suddenness, the stark contrast that creates the strong emotional Kamamuta. And because synchrony, you kind of need time, maybe it can never be that sudden, but you can maybe create like a Kamamuta mood out of, for instance, the synchronous heart chakra meditation, where you move in synchrony for, I don't know, 20 minutes, or how long were they in synchrony?
45 minutes, the session.
40 minutes, yeah. So then, that's not an emotion anymore. Right?
No.
It's just a state, it's a mood. Yeah. Okay, now, I thought about how to, or whether the first theoretical notions can be basically lifted to that level of emotional synchrony. And I think what you would have to explain is first, how does this different time scale work? So with movement synchrony, you're talking about timings in the seconds. Maybe a hand movement like takes 2 seconds back, and then we're talking about this kind of time scale. But as I said in my first question to Kota, when you have emotions, they work on a different time scale. Like they take, I don't know, 2 minutes, 3 minutes to fully develop. Then they recede, then maybe you have another burst. So the time scale is different to emotions. But we are able to work with different time scales cognitively, and we're probably representing them in some kind of movement through space, in imaginary space. So I think if you generalize behavioral synchrony to this more metaphorical timescale of longer movement through the emotional space, then probably this can be very similarly modeled. And then you have a movement that is through the possibilities of emotion and arousal and affect, rather than through dynamics of the body. But I think the processes would be very similar. So I think that can